Boston sleeps under the boots of redcoats. But beneath the silence, a storm is rising. The chill of a Boston morning bit through the fog that rolled off the harbor. Tall masts stood like bare trees against the gray sky, and the faint creak of wooden ships echoed across the docks. 17-year-old Samuel Carter tightened the worn scarf around his neck and glanced at the British soldiers marching down King Street. Their red coats glowed like fire under the pale sun. Sam worked at his father's print shop, Carter's Press and Paper, a modest business that printed pamphlets, letters, and sometimes the forbidden words of rebellion. Greater than, the Crown will not be pleased if they find out about this one, murmured Mr. Carter, slipping a folded sheet into a bundle of papers. It's Thomas Paine's draft, says something about common sense. Sam smiled faintly. He'd heard whispers of revolution in taverns and markets, in sermons and secret meetings. Everyone talked about liberty, though no one dared to say it too loudly. That afternoon, when the bell of the Old South meeting house tolled, Sam followed the crowd that gathered in the square. There, a tall man stood on a barrel, his voice thunderous, Samuel Adams. They tax our tea, our paper, our very right to speak. Shall we bow to tyranny, or stand as free men? The crowd erupted. Men waved fists in the air. Women clutched their shawls, eyes burning with resolve. Sam felt something stir in his chest. Fear, yes, but also fire. That night, he wrote in his journal. The night was thick with mist. Lanterns swung gently on doorways, casting shaky shadows across cobblestone streets. Samuel Carter gripped his father's old musket, its wood polished from years of use. Tonight, he would ride with the militia, not just to witness history, but to make it. Paul Revere's voice echoed through the quiet tavern as he briefed the riders. Greater than, the regulars are marching tonight. Lexington, Concord, we must alert the countryside. Every man who can hold a musket must be ready. Sam's heart pounded as he mounted his horse. Alongside him rode Thomas Green, a childhood friend who had a knack for mischief but now seemed serious beyond his years. They rode silently through alleys, the hooves of their horses muffled against the foggy streets. The first shots rang out at Lexington Green, a brief, chaotic volley that would be remembered forever. Sam ducked instinctively, the musket trembling in his hands. He saw men fall, some screaming, some silent. Smoke curled in the moonlight, and the metallic scent of gunpowder filled the air. Greater than, stand your ground, shouted an officer, though many seemed frozen with fear. After the clash, they regrouped and raced toward Concord. Sam's legs ached, his lungs burned, but adrenaline kept him moving. At Concord's North Bridge, the Minutemen had formed a line. British troops advanced, but the colonists, including Sam, fired with determination. Every shot was a statement, we will not bow. By dawn, the redcoats retreated. Samuel Carter, soaked in sweat and dirt, looked at the rising sun over the fields. Victory was small, but the message was loud and clear, the revolution had begun. That night, Sam wrote feverishly in his journal. Greater than, tonight, the world changed. We are no longer subjects of a distant king. We are Americans, and freedom will be our fight. Winter's frost had blanketed Boston. Smoke curled from chimneys, mixing with the fog rolling off the harbor. The city was tense. British troops lined the streets, their redcoats a constant reminder of the Crown's power. But outside, the Continental Army had settled around the city, and Samuel Carter found himself among them. He trudged through snow-crusted fields, musket in hand, alongside Thomas Green and a handful of other young men. Campfires dotted the hills, their glow tiny against the sprawling British fortifications. General George Washington, tall and commanding, rode along the lines, inspecting the soldiers. He was a figure of both reassurance and fear, his calm demeanor masking the immense pressure of leading a fledgling army against the might of Britain. Greater than, discipline and courage, men, he said. We are not just fighting for land, we are fighting for liberty itself. Sam shivered, partly from the cold, partly from the weight of the moment. Nights were the hardest. The soldiers huddled in tents, listening to distant cannon fire, knowing that at any moment, the British might strike. He often wrote letters to his family, describing life in the camp, but never mentioning the fear that sometimes gripped him. Sam shivered, partly from the cold, partly from the weight of the moment. Nights were the hardest. The soldiers huddled in tents, listening to distant cannon fire, knowing that at any moment, the British might strike. He often wrote letters to his family, describing life in the camp, but never mentioning the fear that sometimes gripped him. During one patrol, Sam witnessed the first real test of resolve. A small skirmish erupted near Dorchester Heights. The Minutemen held the line, exchanging fire with British soldiers. Thomas Green was grazed by a bullet, a shallow wound, but enough to leave him shaken. Sam helped him back to camp, the snow red with streaks of blood. We'll get through this, Sam whispered, though the words felt hollow. Weeks turned into months. Supplies ran low, morale wavered, but the siege of Boston continued. Samuel Carter learned the harsh truths of war. Courage alone was not enough, strategy, patience, and unity were just as crucial. Finally, in March 1776, a bold move by General Washington, positioning cannons atop Dorchester Heights, forced the British to evacuate Boston. The city cheered as the Redcoats sailed away, a symbol of the Revolution's first major victory. Sam watched the ships disappear over the horizon, heart swelling with pride and relief. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Freedom tastes sweet, but the path ahead will be long and dangerous. Today, we have shown that a few determined men can change the course of history." Philadelphia was alive with tension. The summer sun beat down on cobblestone streets crowded with delegates, scribes, and curious citizens. Samuel Carter had traveled north with a small group of messengers carrying letters, pamphlets, and intelligence from the battlefields. At just 18, he felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. They slipped into the Silver Spur, where the bartender gave them a nervous glance. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Sheriff's been asking about you, Crowe. Says you're mixed up in something." Elias leaned in close. "Then he's right." Before the bartender could reply, the saloon doors swung open. Sheriff Pike strode in with two deputies, his badge shining like a warning. His grin was easy, but his eyes were cold. Well, Pike drawled. "Look what the wind blew in. Mr. Crowe and the marshal's pretty widow." Elias stood still. "Evenin', Sheriff." Pike's hand rested on his holster. "I hear you've been nosin' around places that don't concern you. Now, I'd hate to think you were causin' trouble in my town." Elias smiled faintly. "Seems like there's plenty of trouble already here, Sheriff. Just not the kind you can arrest." Pike's smile faded. "Watch your tongue, Crowe. This town's got rules." Clara stepped forward. "And what about my husband's death? You got rules for that, too." The saloon went quiet. Pike's face twitched, just slightly. Then he tipped his hat. "Ma'am, your husband rode out of town and didn't come back. The desert's got a way of keeping what it takes. I suggest you make peace with that." He turned to leave, but not before glancing at Elias. "And you, Crowe, you'd best ride on. Redemption Ridge don't need ghosts from the past." They watched him go, the sound of his boots fading into the dust. Clara whispered, "He's working for Harlan, isn't he?" Elias nodded. "And if we're right, the next train outta here's carryin' more than freight." They slipped into the Silver Spur, where the bartender gave them a nervous glance. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "Sheriff's been asking about you, Crowe. Says you're mixed up in something." Elias leaned in close. "Then he's right." Before the bartender could reply, the saloon doors swung open. Sheriff Pike strode in with two deputies, his badge shining like a warning. His grin was easy, but his eyes were cold. Well, Pike drawled. "Look what the wind blew in. Mr. Crowe and the marshal's pretty widow." Elias stood still. "Evenin', Sheriff." Pike's hand rested on his holster. "I hear you've been nosin' around places that don't concern you. Now, I'd hate to think you were causin' trouble in my town." Elias smiled faintly. "Seems like there's plenty of trouble already here, Sheriff. Just not the kind you can arrest." Pike's smile faded. "Watch your tongue, Crowe. This town's got rules." Clara stepped forward. "And what about my husband's death? You got rules for that, too." The saloon went quiet. Pike's face twitched, just slightly. Then he tipped his hat. "Ma'am, your husband rode out of town and didn't come back. The desert's got a way of keeping what it takes. I suggest you make peace with that." He turned to leave, but not before glancing at Elias. "And you, Crowe, you'd best ride on. Redemption Ridge don't need ghosts from the past." They watched him go, the sound of his boots fading into the dust. Clara whispered, "He's working for Harlan, isn't he?" Elias nodded. "And if we're right, the next train outta here's carryin' more than freight." That night, from the ridge above town, Elias and Clara watched as the train prepared to leave. Men in suits loaded wooden crates marked Harlan Company into the cargo car. Elias peered through his binoculars. Those crates ain't tools. What are they? Clara asked. He lowered the glasses. Guns. She stared at him, horrified. For the railroad. For whoever's payin' them, he said. Maybe Harlan's got his own private army. The whistle blew, echoing across the valley. Elias exhaled slowly, the weight of the truth pressing down. The marshal was right, he said. And now they'll kill anyone who knows it. Clara turned to him. Then we don't run. He looked at her. You got a plan. She nodded, eyes glinting in the dark. We stop that train. Perfect. Let's kick this story into full action mode. Here's chapter 3. The Train to Hell, of your Wild West saga. The night was thick with smoke and tension. Red lanterns from the Harlan train flickered across the tracks like angry fireflies, and the rhythmic clatter of iron wheels echoed through the valley. Elias crouched behind a sandstone outcrop, Clara pressed close beside him. Their shadows stretched long across the dirt, as if the land itself was watching, waiting. Those crates, Elias whispered. We need to know what's in 'em before sunrise. Harlan doesn't just ship guns for fun. Clara nodded. Then we stop the train. He raised an eyebrow. Stop it. With what? Clara opened her satchel and pulled out a small bundle of dynamite sticks wrapped in oilcloth. Elias blinked. Where did you get? Marshal Briggs taught me a thing or two about explosives, she said, her voice calm. He wanted me to know, just in case. Seems like that day came sooner than we thought. Elias couldn't help a dry laugh. Your husband really prepared you for the apocalypse, didn't he? She shot him a glare. Just keep your eyes open, Crow. Dash dash dash. They slipped along the embankment, keeping low to avoid the lanterns. The train hissed as steam escaped the boiler, and men in black coats carried crates, shouting orders in clipped, harsh tones. A few railroad guards leaned lazily on their rifles, unaware of the two shadowy figures crouched in the darkness above. Elias scanned the layout. The train had 7 cars. 3 freight cars, a passenger car with curtains drawn tight, a caboose, and 2 more freight cars at the rear. The last 2 cars, he muttered. That's where they'll hide the goods they don't want anyone seeing. Clara unwrapped the dynamite. We'll need to derail it. Just enough to open the doors, not blow it sky high. Can you handle that? Elias studied the rails. I can make it loud enough to scare the bastards. But timing's everything. Dash dash dash. Minutes felt like hours. The train whistle blew again, a long, mournful note that echoed through the mesas. One guard stepped away to check a bolt, another turned to argue with a foreman. This was their chance. Elias set the first stick of dynamite under the rail, wedging it between the ties. Clara held the fuse, ready to ignite. The smell of gunmetal and oil filled their nostrils. A fly buzzed past. One wrong move and they'd be shredded like kindling. Indeed, Saratoga would soon convince France to formally ally with the Americans, providing military support, funds, and hope for the revolutionaries. Sam felt a surge of pride. Not only had they won a battle, but they had changed the course of the war. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Greater than, today, we proved that the impossible can be achieved. The world is watching, and our cause is no longer ours alone. Freedom has found its first ally, and with it, the promise of victory grows brighter." The snow of Valley Forge had melted months ago, but its memory lingered like a ghost in Samuel Carter's mind. The hardships of the previous winter, frostbitten toes, empty stomachs, and sleepless nights, had forged him into a soldier, disciplined and unwavering. Now, as the Continental Army regrouped in the spring of 1778, hope carried a new weight. France had officially recognized the United States and promised aid. Sam rode through the camp, observing French officers arriving with their men and supplies. Their uniforms were bright, and their ships brought cannons, ammunition, and, most importantly, belief in the American cause. Thomas Green, riding beside him, could hardly contain his excitement. "Greater than, can you believe it, Sam? They've actually come to help us." "It's real," Sam replied, eyes scanning the bustling camp. "The world is finally taking notice." The French alliance meant more than just reinforcements. It boosted morale, inspired courage, and provided the Continental Army with strategies learned from European warfare. Sam trained alongside French officers, learning new formations and techniques. He realized that victory would not come from raw courage alone, but from knowledge, unity, and strategic planning. Yet, not all was easy. Sam witnessed the lingering fear and fatigue in soldiers' faces, men still haunted by Valley Forge, still mourning comrades lost. He and Thomas often took long walks outside the camp, speaking quietly of dreams, fears, and the America they hoped to help build. Greater than, the fight isn't just with muskets, Thomas said one evening. It's with hope, Sam. With belief. That's what keeps us alive. With the French Navy patrolling the coast and supplies arriving steadily, the Continental Army felt revitalized. Sam realized that the revolution had transformed from a desperate struggle to a coordinated effort, with the possibility of victory now within reach. That night, he wrote in his journal, "Greater than, winter tested our bodies, Saratoga tested our courage, and now, with allies at our side, our hearts are strengthened. Liberty is no longer a dream whispered in secret, it is a flame burning brightly across the colonies. The revolution marches on, and so do we." The southern colonies were a land of heat, humidity, and constant tension. Samuel Carter rode with a detachment of Continental soldiers through dusty roads and dense forests. Unlike the open fields of the North, the South offered guerrilla warfare, sudden ambushes, and uncertainty at every turn. She met his gaze, unflinching. "Then we make sure he doesn't succeed." Elias smiled faintly, the ghost of his outlaw past flickering in his eyes. "I like your style. Let's show the West it's not finished with Crowe yet." The wind howled across the ridge again, carrying the scent of smoke, iron, and the promise of revenge. In the darkness, two figures melted into the night, ready to chase justice through a land that had no mercy, only dust, iron, and blood. The morning sun rose like a knife over Redemption Ridge, burning the horizon red. Smoke still lingered over the valley from the sabotaged Harlan train, curling lazily into the sky. The townsfolk peeked from windows and porches, whispering about the night's chaos, but no one dared approach. Elias and Clara had spent the night hidden in a small cave along the ridge, the ledger between them like a sacred relic. The paper smelled of ink and smoke. Every page carried the weight of lives ruined and deals made in darkness. "We can't stay here long," Elias said, folding the ledger. "Harlan's men will be searching the valley by now. And Pike, he's already asking questions." Clara nodded. "We need allies. Someone who can help us take this ledger to the right people, people who'll act before the town swallowed in Harlan's greed." Elias's jaw tightened. "And you think there's anyone left?" She shrugged. "The railroad's grown too fast for him to control everyone. There are always cracks, always someone willing to fight back. By noon, the town was alive with suspicion and fear. Sheriff Pike had mounted his horse and ridden through the streets, shouting orders to deputies and townsfolk alike. His silver star gleamed in the sun, but his eyes were cold and calculating. Elias and Clara waited in the shadow of the general store, watching Pike's every move. "He's hiding something," Clara whispered. Elias grunted. "That's the nicest thing you can say about a man like Pike." Suddenly, gunfire erupted from the street ahead. A group of Harlan's men stormed past, rifles swinging, chasing a lone townsperson who had apparently tried to warn the miners in the northern camp. Chaos erupted, horses bolted, shopkeepers ducked behind counters, and the whine of bullets tore through the midday heat. Elias grabbed Clara's arm. "Move." They darted across the street, keeping low, and slipped into an alley behind the saloon. The sound of gunfire and screams faded, replaced by the distant whistle of the Harlan train, now being repaired and reloaded further down the tracks. "They're escalating," Clara said, her voice tight. "They're not just protecting the land, they're hunting us." "Good," Elias muttered. "I was hoping for a fight." They knew they couldn't confront the Harlan men in the streets. Instead, Elias led Clara to an abandoned barn near the North Ridge, a place he remembered from his outlaw days. The building was decrepit, but its high walls offered a perfect vantage point over the tracks below. From the barn's loft, they could see the train men unloading crates, moving faster than usual. The destruction from the previous night had angered Harlan, and Elias could feel the tension in the air. "Here's the problem," he said, pointing to the train cars. "They're armed to the teeth. Rifles, pistols, even cannons for some reason. If we try to stop them again, we'll be walking into hell." Clara set the ledger on the loft floor, careful not to crease it. "Then we don't attack them. We outsmart them. Harlan underestimates the land, and us." Elias narrowed his eyes. "You always did like dangerous plans." Clara smirked. Someone has to. Someone who's not afraid of ghosts. Elias glanced at her, thinking of the fire in her eyes, the memory of her husband, and the peril they now faced together. In that moment, he realized the West wasn't just a land of dust and iron, it was a land of choices. And every choice had blood as a currency. Night fell again, black and heavy. The train camp was quieter now, but the shadows seemed thicker, almost alive. From their perch in the barn, Elias spotted a figure moving along the ridge, silent, deliberate. He leaned close to Clara. Someone's coming. The figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing a lean, hard-faced man carrying a rifle. Elias's heart skipped. The man's eyes glinted with recognition and menace. Matt Crowley, Elias muttered under his breath. Clara tilted her head. Who? One of Harlan's best, Elias said. Used to ride with him out east. Never met a man quicker with a gun, or deadlier with a lie. The man crouched near the train tracks, signaling with hand gestures. Others soon followed, 4 more men emerging from the shadows. They were the strike team Harlan had sent to recover the ledger and silence anyone involved. Clara gripped Elias's arm. We can't outrun them in the open. Elias scanned the barn. Nails, rotting beams, and loose floorboards formed the perfect trap. Then we don't outrun them. We make them come to us. Using the barn's loft, Elias and Clara prepared their ambush. They stacked crates along the floor, rigged a few with leftover dynamite, and waited. The men moved closer, rifles ready, boots crunching on gravel. The first man stepped inside the barn. A shot rang out from above, just a warning. He dropped, startled. Elias and Clara pressed forward from the loft, firing shots that drove the rest back into the night. The barn exploded in chaos as rigged crates blew, sending splinters and fire into the air. Harlan's men scattered, their formation broken. One by one, they retreated into the shadows, wounded and furious. Elias landed beside Clara, breathing hard. That's enough for tonight. Clara clutched the ledger. They'll come back. Elias nodded. And we'll be ready. Harlan wants blood, but he doesn't know the West has its own laws. The night grew quiet once more. Smoke from the burning crates curled into the sky, carrying the scent of gunpowder and iron. Above the ridge, the moon watched silently, a pale witness to the lawlessness below. Clara looked at Elias. We're not just fighting for the ledger, are we? He glanced at her, the wind whipping dust into their faces. No, he said quietly. We're fighting for every soul Harlan thinks he owns. And we're fighting for redemption, mine, yours, and maybe the town's too. She nodded. Then let's make sure Harlan learns something tonight. The West isn't finished with him. Elias smiled faintly, the ghost of the outlaw past returning with a spark of purpose. No, it isn't. The two of them stood atop the ridge, watching the train tracks stretch into darkness. Somewhere down the line, the next act of blood, betrayal, and justice was waiting, and they were ready to meet it head-on. The dawn was cruel, white-hot and relentless, burning away the night's shadows. Redemption Ridge had woken to the smoke still rising from the sabotaged train, and the townsfolk whispered fearfully in doorways and alleys. Word had spread fast. Someone had dared to challenge Gideon Harlan, and that someone had survived the night. Harlan's wrath, Elias knew, would arrive soon. And it would not be subtle. From a cliff above the valley, Harlan himself watched. He was a tall man, perfectly dressed even in the rough lands of the West, his black coat dusted with the desert. His eyes were steel gray, cold and calculating, and every crease on his face screamed a lifetime of ambition. Beside him, Matt Crowley, a wolfish enforcer with a rifle, spoke in a low tone. They destroyed the shipment, sir. Blew it up right under the men's noses, Crowley reported. Harlan's lips pressed thin. Then they must pay. Every last one. And bring me the ledger. Crowley nodded. We'll find them. Harlan's smile was almost inhuman. No, we will find them. And the West will remember what happens to those who defy me. Back in town, Elias and Clara knew their time was short. They had spent the night tracking the ledger's importance, discovering lists of land deeds, secret payments, and murder contracts tied to nearly every official in the county, including Sheriff Pike. Clara's hands shook as she flipped through the ledger. The town, Pike, they're all on Harlan's payroll. Elias gritted his teeth. That explains a lot. The sheriff's smile, the guards, the whispers. He's just another ghost in Harlan's empire. Clara's voice was low but firm. Then we can't trust anyone here. No, Elias said. Not a soul. And that means the next move is ours. By mid-morning, the first signs of retaliation appeared. A rider came screaming down the main street, warning of Harlan's men converging from the east. The town panicked, shutters slammed, and windows rattled. Elias and Clara moved quickly, leading the few townsfolk willing to fight to an old stone church on the hill, a defensible position overlooking the valley. Inside, dust and shadows made for perfect cover, and the bell tower offered a vantage point to scout the incoming threat. They'll hit the streets first, Elias said. Then they'll come up here. We need a plan. Clara looked at him, determination burning in her eyes. We fight smart. They think they own the land, the law, the people. But they don't own the West. The first wave hit at noon. Harlan's men stormed through the town with rifles and pistols, pushing terrified townsfolk aside. They didn't expect resistance. Elias fired from the tower, picking off a guard with deadly precision. Clara followed, her pistol singing in rhythm with his rifle. Sparks flew from nearby wooden posts as bullets tore through the streets. The battle escalated quickly. Harlan's men regrouped and tried to flank the church, but Elias had anticipated this. He and Clara had rigged barrels of gunpowder along the southern path. A single spark, a small explosion, and the attackers were thrown back, dust and smoke filling the street. Inside the church, townsfolk gasped, some crying, others fighting. But Clara's eyes were fixed on Elias. We can't hold them forever, she shouted over the noise. I know, he replied. But we can make them pay every step of the way. Hours passed. Harlan's men advanced, retreating, and advancing again, relentless as the desert sun. In the chaos, Sheriff Pike revealed himself, riding at the head of a squadron of deputies, guns blazing. Clara hissed. I knew he'd betray us. Elias glared at Pike, anger coiling in his chest. Time to settle old scores. With a roar, Elias leapt from the tower, firing as he went. Clara followed, shooting from behind a barricade of pews and crates. Pike's deputies faltered under the onslaught, their courage cracking. Then, in the midst of the fight, Harlan himself appeared on the ridge above the town, surveying the chaos with cold amusement. He lifted a pair of binoculars, eyes locking on Elias and Clara. Crowe, he called out, voice carrying over the gunfire. You've made a mistake that will cost you everything. Surrender the ledger, and I may spare the town. Elias spat into the dust. The West isn't for sale, Harlan. And neither are we. Harlan's lips twisted into a cruel grin. Then die. The next hour was a blur of smoke, fire, and blood. Clara and Elias moved like shadows, firing, dodging, and strategizing on the fly. Townsfolk joined when they could, some fighting with courage they didn't know they had. By late afternoon, the battle had reached a standoff. Harlan's men regrouped at the edge of town, licking their wounds and counting the cost. The church, though battered, still stood, and inside Elias and Clara held the ledger like a talisman. Elias looked at Clara. This isn't over. Harlan's smart. And he's vicious. He'll come back harder. Clara nodded, brushing dust from her coat. Then we prepare. We take the fight to him next. Outside, the wind carried the scent of gunpowder and smoke. The valley was quiet now, but Elias knew it was only a pause. Harlan's wrath would not be denied, and the next confrontation would be closer, deadlier, and more personal than anything they had faced. Elias clenched his fists. We're going to finish this, or die trying. Clara's eyes met his. Then let's make sure it counts. Above them, the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over Redemption Ridge. The West was bleeding, but its spirit was alive. And Elias Crowe, once an outlaw running from his past, now stood at the center of a storm that could change the frontier forever. Night fell over Redemption Ridge like a blanket of iron and dust. The town was quiet now, but the scars of the day's battle were everywhere, broken windows, scorched wooden posts, and the lingering smell of gunpowder. Inside the stone church, Elias and Clara worked by candlelight, poring over the ledger and planning their next move. Clara ran her fingers over the pages. There's something here I don't understand, she said. Payments, threats, and a series of names that don't make sense. Some of these people, they shouldn't be involved. Not anyone alive. Elias leaned in, squinting at the ink. That's because they're ghosts now. People Harlan made disappear to cover his tracks. Including your husband's deputy, Briggs' men from the North Camp. Look here, he tapped a column of dates and initials. The patterns match disappearances along the railroad line, north to east. Every time Harlan expanded, someone vanished. Clara's eyes widened. Then, the marshal, he's not dead. Elias shook his head slowly. I don't know, but I've got a feeling he didn't die where everyone thinks he did. Harlan doesn't leave witnesses alive, he hides them. Somewhere, secret, .. Outside, the wind carried an uneasy whisper through the valley. Something, or someone, was moving along the ridge above the town. Elias sensed it before he saw it. Clara, he whispered, stay low. A shadow detached itself from the ridge, a lone rider cloaked in black, moving silently toward the church. Elias grabbed his rifle, scanning for a clear shot, when the figure stopped just at the edge of the trees. Marshal, Clara whispered, stepping closer. The rider dismounted, lowering his hood. It wasn't her husband, at least, not in the way she expected. The man's face was lined, hardened, and pale from confinement. His clothes were tattered, and his eyes held a fire tempered by survival. Elias Crowe, he said, voice gravelly. Elias lowered the rifle slightly. Depends on who's asking. I'm Samuel Briggs, the man said. I was held. The marshal your husband, he was trying to protect me. Harlan took me north when I got too close to the truth. Clara's breath caught. You're alive, all this time. Samuel nodded grimly. I was meant to die in the winter snow. But I escaped, hiding along the railroad lines, surviving on luck and the kindness of those who feared Harlan but couldn't fight him openly. Elias studied him carefully. Then you know enough to bring Harlan down. Samuel shook his head. Enough to start. Harlan has spies everywhere. The ledger you carry, it's only part of it. But combined with what I know, we can strike where he least expects. .. The three of them huddled in the church loft, planning through candlelight. Samuel spoke of secret passages, hidden rail depots, and the brutal enforcement squads Harlan sent to silence dissent. We have to hit Harlan fast, Samuel said. Before he realizes the ledger is missing. Before Pike and his deputies can track us down again. Clara's grip tightened on the ledger. Then we go to the North Ridge. There's a depot there, hidden from town. If Harlan's men are moving shipments of weapons, that's where they'll be stored. Elias's mind raced. We'll need more firepower than we've got, and more distractions. Harlan won't come quietly. Samuel leaned in, whispering urgently. There's another way. A train, one of Harlan's own, that we can reroute. Loaded with explosives. Blow the depot before they even know we're there. Clara's eyes lit up. A one-shot strike. Quick, clean, devastating. Elias exhaled slowly. High risk, high reward. Just the kind of plan that makes men like us either legends or corpses. .. Later that night, Elias and Clara watched the valley from the ridge, Samuel beside them. Lights flickered from the train depot far below, moving like fireflies in the dark. The wind carried the distant whistle of the Harlan train, but tonight it was theirs to manipulate. Clara whispered, if we fail. Elias cut her off. We won't. Not this time. We've learned Harlan's moves, his men, his weaknesses. He thinks he controls the West. But he doesn't control us. Samuel nodded. And we have something he doesn't, knowledge, cunning, and fire in our hands. The three of them made a pact under the moonlight. No mercy, no hesitation, no turning back. The ledger, the truth, and the memory of every life Harlan had destroyed were now their weapons. Above them, the wind carried the shadow of the missing marshal, the past alive, guiding them. And in that quiet, tense night, Elias knew one thing for certain. Harlan had awoken a force he couldn't possibly contain. The West was rising, and it would not be silenced. Night was alive with anticipation. Elias, Clara, and Samuel crouched behind a ridge overlooking the northern depot. Harlan's men were guarding it like a fortress, barrels of black powder stacked near the rails, armed guards patrolling every corner, and the glow of lanterns flickering over crates marked with the Harlan Company seal. Clara held the ledger tightly. If we do this, there's no turning back. Elias adjusted his rifle. Ain't ever been a turning back in my life. We light the fuse, and we fight like hell. Samuel nodded, pointing toward the tracks. The train arrives at midnight. That's our chance. We reroute it into the depot, blow the weapons and records, and get out before anyone knows what hit them. The plan was daring, dangerous, nearly suicidal, but the three of them had no choice. the Ledger held the key to saving Redemption Ridge, exposing Harlan, and stopping the trail of murders and corruption that followed him. By midnight, the train appeared, cutting through the darkness like a silver snake, its whistle piercing the quiet desert. Elias signaled Clara and Samuel, and they worked swiftly to adjust the switch, sending the train barreling toward the depot. The depot shook as the train slammed into the wooden structure. Dynamite packed along the rails and inside the building ignited, sending a massive fireball into the night sky. Harlan's men scrambled, but the explosion was too sudden, too powerful. Chaos reigned. From their ridge, Elias, Clara, and Samuel fired at anyone trying to escape, their shots precise, the Ledger safe in Clara's hands. When the flames died down, the depot lay in ruins. Crates of weapons were destroyed. Harlan's secret payments and records were reduced to ash. It was a victory, but one that would cost them dearly. Harlan, furious, rode into Redemption Ridge with 100 men, black smoke trailing behind. He stormed the town with a vengeance, determined to recover the Ledger and exact revenge. Elias, Clara, and Samuel knew this was the moment they had to face the man directly. Using the town's abandoned streets and alleyways, they led Harlan's men into ambushes, picking them off one by one. Townsfolk, inspired by their courage, joined in. Finally, Harlan confronted Elias atop the ridge. The two men faced each other, one a legend of violence now seeking justice, the other a man who believed he could control life and death in the West. "You think you've won," Harlan spat, pistols drawn. "This town, this land, it's mine." Elias's eyes were cold. "The West belongs to no man. Not to you, not to anyone who thinks they can buy it with blood and gold." A duel began under the moonlight. Guns flashed, shots rang, and dust rose around them. Harlan's arrogance was his weakness. Elias moved with precision born of years on the run, finally landing a shot that disarmed the tycoon and sent him sprawling into the dust. Clara and Samuel ensured the remaining men fled or surrendered. Redemption Ridge was theirs, for now, free from the shadow of Harlan's tyranny. In the aftermath, Elias, Clara, and Samuel worked to restore the town. Sheriff Pike and other corrupt officials were arrested with the Ledger as proof of their crimes. Clara organized the town's women and workers, helping to rebuild homes and the community. Samuel became a lawman in the region, working to protect the railroad and settlers from further corruption. Elias, the former outlaw, finally found peace, not in hiding, but in using his skills to protect the people and the land he once ran from. One evening, Elias stood on the ridge overlooking the valley, the wind carrying the scent of sagebrush and iron. Clara joined him, the Ledger safely stored away in the town hall. "You've changed," she said softly. Elias smiled faintly, staring at the sunset. "Maybe, or maybe the West just forced me to grow up." Clara leaned against him. "Whatever it is, you stayed. You fought. And Redemption Ridge, it's alive because of you." Elias exhaled slowly, the weight of years and battles lifting slightly. "Not just me," he said. "All of us. The West, it fights back if you give it a chance." The wind rustled the tall grasses, carrying the memory of battles fought, lives lost, and justice won. The West was harsh, brutal, and unforgiving, but for the first time, Elias Crowe felt like it had given him something back. Years later, Redemption Ridge thrived. The railroad expanded safely, land disputes were settled, and the town became a haven for settlers seeking freedom from corruption. Elias and Clara married quietly, their lives still shadowed by the memory of the past but illuminated by the promise of peace. Samuel Briggs continued his work as a marshal, exposing hidden crimes along the railroad lines. The legend of Elias Crowe spread far and wide, not as a murderer, nor a thief, but as a man who confronted greed and injustice in the heart of the West, risking everything to protect the innocent. And though the West continued to be a land of dust and iron, lawlessness and fortune, one thing remained certain: the courage of those who dare to stand for justice can change its course forever. As the sun set over the rugged mesas, the wind whispered across the plains, a silent salute to the heroes of Redemption Ridge.